My name is Emerson Yates, 31 years old, and the day my own brother forced me out of the company I built from nothing is burned into my memory forever. That morning, I walked into the lobby of our downtown Jacksonville building like I had for the last 7 years, only to have two security guards block the elevator while my brother Paxton stood there with that smug grin I grew up hating. In front of 40 employees who used to call me boss, he looked me straight in the eye and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Poor people have no right to run a business." Then he handed me a box for my things and told security to escort me out. I founded Nexus Digital Marketing from a garage. I hired every single person watching, and in less than 5 minutes, my own blood took it all away. Or so he thought. What Paxton didn't know was the one detail that was about to make every single person in that lobby turn pale when the real owner of the building finally showed up. If you want to know how I made my brother regret those words in under 48 hours, stay until the end, because this one gets brutal. Everything started 7 years ago in the garage of the house Jet and I were renting on the south side of Jacksonville. We had exactly 2 second-hand laptops, 1 folding table, and about $9,000 left in our joint savings account after putting every extra penny toward the down payment on that tiny place. Most people thought we were crazy, but that garage became the birthplace of Nexus Digital Marketing. I spent the first 2 years doing everything myself, cold calling local businesses, building websites at 2 in the morning, teaching myself Google Ads and Facebook campaigns while holding down a part-time barista job just to keep the lights on. Jet, my fiancé, Jet Holt, worked construction during the day and helped me with whatever he could at night, from carrying boxes, when we finally moved into a real office, to proofreading every client proposal until his eyes went red. He never once complained about the ramen dinners, the constant smell of coffee in the house, or the fact that we postponed the wedding 3 times because every spare dollar went back into the company. Meanwhile, my brother Paxton Yates, 37 at the time, had already been handed a 7-figure trust from our grandfather the day he graduated from Wharton. He moved into a condo on the river, drove a Porsche his first year out of school, and made sure everyone at family gatherings knew how generous our parents had been to him. Mom and Dad never missed an opportunity to remind me that Paxton was set for life, and that I should stop chasing pipe dreams when there was still money available if I just asked nicely. They said it at Christmas, at birthdays, even at my own college graduation when I turned down the new car they offered and asked for the cash to buy servers instead. I never asked. I wanted to prove I could build something real without leaning on family money the way Paxton always had. By year 4, Nexus had 20 employees' offices on the 3rd and 4th floors of a downtown building, and our first 8-figure revenue year. Clients started flying in from Atlanta and Miami just to meet the team. Local TV did a segment on us. The Chamber of Commerce gave me their Young Entrepreneur Award. I finally felt like I was standing on solid ground I had poured myself. That same year, my assistant Nova Hartman joined straight out of UNF with more energy and loyalty than I could have hoped for. She became the person who knew every contract, every deadline, every password, and still managed to keep me sane when the workload threatened to bury me. Nova saw the long hours Jet and I put in, understood why we still drove the same 5-year-old Tacoma, and never once treated me like the less successful sibling the way the rest of the family did. Paxton, on the other hand, barely acknowledged the company existed until the local business journal ran a cover story calling Nexus the fastest-growing agency in North Florida. Suddenly, at Thanksgiving, he leaned back in his chair, swirled his scotch, and told Dad loud enough for the whole table to hear that it was cute. I had finally found a hobby that paid a little. Mom laughed along and patted his arm like he'd just said the cleverest thing in the world. I smiled, said nothing, and went home that night, more determined than ever to keep growing without anyone in that house ever being able to claim credit. 7 months ago, Paxton suddenly wanted to help. He showed up at the office unannounced one Tuesday afternoon, wearing a tailored navy suit and carrying a leather portfolio like he belonged there. He told me he'd been talking to some Wharton classmates who ran a small venture fund, and they were impressed by our numbers. For the first time in years, he looked me in the eye without the usual smirk and said the family should keep things in the family. I wanted to believe him. Over the next 3 weeks, he arranged everything: term sheets, valuation, due diligence calls. He kept saying how perfect the timing was because Nexus needed capital to scale nationally, and he didn't want outside sharks taking advantage of his little sister. Mom called twice to tell me how proud she was that Paxton was finally stepping up. Even Dad sent a rare text. "Let your brother help. He knows what he's doing." The documents arrived in waves, hundreds of pages. Drag-along rights, anti-dilution provisions, investor consent requirements, and a shareholder agreement that gave new preferred stockholders the power to act by written consent without a meeting. I read as much as I could after midnight, but I'm not a corporate lawyer. Paxton sat across from me at the conference table, calm and patient, explaining every section in simple terms. When I hesitated on the proxy form that gave the lead investor voting control over my own shares in certain situations, he laughed softly and said, "Emerson, it's standard Series A stuff. You're getting $7 million. You're not giving up control. You're just letting professionals handle the boring paperwork." I signed. All of it. 2 weeks later, Reginald Corbin, the managing partner of the fund Paxton claimed to represent, took a seat on our board. He flew in from Charlotte, shook my hand like we were old friends, and spent an hour complimenting the team. I thought we had closed a clean, fair round. For the first 2 months, everything felt normal. Money hit the account. We hired 15 new people, leased 2 more floors, and booked our biggest Q3 ever. Paxton stayed mostly quiet, only checking in once a week with quick update calls. Then, 4 months to the day after closing, Nova walked into my office, white as a sheet, holding a single sheet of paper. It was a written consent signed by holders of 72% of the voting power, including the proxy I had so trustingly handed over. Effective immediately, the board had removed me as CEO and installed Paxton in my place. Another page appointed Reginald as chairman. A third page scheduled an emergency shareholder call for the following morning to ratify everything. I sat there staring at the signatures until the words stopped making sense. Nova closed the door and told me she had just overheard Paxton on speakerphone, laughing about how easy it had been to flip the script once he controlled the preferred stock rights. He never brought in real outside money. The entire round came from his personal trust and a few shell entities he controlled. The valuation was real, the cash was real, but the voting power now belonged to him. I tried calling him. Straight to voicemail. Texted Mom and Dad asking what was going on. Mom replied instantly, "Sweetheart, Paxton says it's just temporary until things stabilize. Don't make a scene." Dad didn't answer at all. That night, Jet held me while I sat on the kitchen floor and reread every document on my laptop. Page after page of perfectly legal provisions I had agreed to because my own brother told me to trust him. By morning, I understood exactly how completely he had outmaneuvered me and how little any of them had ever believed I belonged in the chair I had earned. That Wednesday morning, I walked into the building like any other day, iced coffee in one hand and my access card already out of my purse. The card reader flashed red. I swiped again. Still red. Before I could try a third time, 2 security guards I had personally hired stepped forward and asked me to wait. One of them, Marcus, looked genuinely uncomfortable when he said my keycard had been deactivated overnight, and that I needed to speak to the new management first. New management. I turned around, and there they were, Paxton and Reginald, standing in the middle of the lobby like they owned the place, which I guess they now believed they did. A dozen employees milled around pretending to check their phones while stealing glances at the scene about to unfold. Paxton wore the same navy suit from the day he made me sign everything, only now the jacket was off and slung over his shoulder like he was already settled into the corner office. He waited until I was close enough for the entire lobby to hear, then spoke slowly and clearly. Poor people have no right to run a business, Emerson. You had a good run, but it's time to let the adults take over. The words hit harder the second time, maybe because they were delivered in front of people who had watched me build Nexus one campaign at a time. A few of them looked away. One junior copywriter actually took a step back. Nova came rushing out of the elevator holding a banker's box that clearly contained her own things. She started to say something in my defense, but Reginald cut her off with a single raised hand and told security she was on immediate administrative leave, effective immediately. They took the box from her arms and escorted her right back toward the revolving door. She looked at me once, eyes wide and apologetic, then disappeared outside. My phone started vibrating nonstop. Jet's name flashed on the screen. When I answered, he was already mid-sentence, voice shaking. He had just received the same board meeting invite. Everyone else got at 6 that morning. Only his added a line that all further communication regarding Nexus digital marketing was to go through Paxton Yates, interim chief executive officer. He kept asking what the hell was happening and whether he needed to leave the job site and come downtown right away. I couldn't answer him because Paxton was still talking, explaining to the growing audience that the company needed stable, experienced leadership moving forward, and that my removal was in the best interest of all shareholders. He used that phrase 3 times. Best interest of all shareholders, like repeating it, made the betrayal sound professional. Someone from accounting asked quietly if payroll would still go out Friday. Paxton smiled and assured her nothing would change for the team. Reginald added that department heads would receive new reporting structures by end of day. A few people nodded like this was all perfectly normal. I stood there in the middle of the lobby holding a coffee I no longer wanted, while the company I had poured 7 years of my life into watched my brother erase me in real time. The security guards hovered nearby, ready to walk me out the moment Paxton gave the signal. My access card dangled uselessly from my fingers. Eventually, Paxton stepped closer, lowered his voice just enough that only I could hear the next part. You should have stayed in your lane, little sister. Some things aren't meant for people who started with nothing. Then he turned his back on me and started shaking hands with employees who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. She kept her voice low, even though the street was loud with traffic and nobody inside the building could hear us anymore. Paxton had already scheduled a term sheet signing with Summit Media in exactly 3 weeks. The deal would value Nexus at $220 million, give Paxton a clean $40 million payout for his preferred shares, and turn the rest of the team into employees of a much larger corporate machine. Once the acquisition closed, every trace of what I had built would disappear under their branding within 6 months. I felt the concrete burning through my skirt while she spoke, but the heat barely registered. My mind flashed back 22 months to the quietest closing I had ever done. I remembered sitting in a Delaware attorney's office at 9 in the morning, wiring the final payment for the 7-story building we were now locked out of. I had formed a single-member LLC called Emerald Coast Holdings, used profits the company had quietly banked during the pandemic surge, and bought the entire property outright with no mortgage and no co-signers. Not even Jet knew the full details. I wanted one thing in this world that nobody in my family could ever touch. Nova watched my face change and stopped talking mid-sentence. She had seen that look on me before, usually right before I landed a client everyone else said was impossible. I pulled my phone out of my purse, scrolled to a contact labeled Only Building, and hit call. Brady Grayson, the property manager I had hired the same week we took occupancy, answered on the second ring. He had been with the building for 12 years and still called me ma'am even after I told him a dozen times to use my first name. I skipped every greeting and asked him to pull the master lease for Nexus Digital Marketing, specifically the section titled Change of Control and Assignment. I heard pages flipping on his end while he searched. When he found it, he read the clause out loud, almost word for word, the way I remembered writing it with our real estate attorney. Any direct or indirect change in voting control of the tenant triggered the landlord's unilateral right to terminate the lease on 30 days' notice and immediately suspend all non-statutory services. I had insisted on that paragraph because I never wanted to be trapped in my own headquarters if someone ever tried to take the company away. I told Brady who I really was, the sole owner of Emerald Coast Holdings, and that control of the tenant had just changed without my consent. His silence lasted maybe 5 seconds before he said, "Understood, Ms. Yates. What would you like me to do?" I asked him to draft the termination notice effective immediately and to begin suspending anything the lease classified as discretionary full HVAC above the legal minimum after-hours keycard access janitorial, beyond basic safety parking validation, and freight elevator priority. I wanted every step documented and every email copied to the attorney, who still held the original closing binder. Nova listened to the entire conversation without moving. When I hung up, she finally exhaled and asked what happened next. I told her the building would start feeling the effects by tomorrow morning, and that Paxton had exactly 30 days to find 7 floors of office space in downtown Jacksonville during the tightest commercial market in a decade. Summit Media would never close a deal without a headquarters in place, and no lender would finance an acquisition that came with an eviction notice. For the first time since the lobby, I felt something close to calm. The sun was brutal, and my blouse was sticking to my back. But the piece of Jacksonville real estate Paxton thought he controlled had always belonged to the one person he spent his whole life looking down on. At 7:03 the following morning, Brady emailed the formal termination notice to Paxton Reginald and every officer listed on the lease. The letter was short, polite, and lethal. 30 days to vacate effective, immediately, citing the change of control clause that had just been triggered. Copies went to the company's registered agent and to the 2 law firms that had handled the original closing. By 7:30, the building system started shutting down exactly as instructed. The main HVAC units dropped to the Florida-mandated minimum for occupied commercial space. 78 degrees at the thermostat, but with no circulation, the upper floors climbed fast. Both passenger elevators displayed orange out-of-service emergency maintenance signs that Brady had printed the night before. The garage gate stayed closed for all tenant tags after the first 20 cars trickled out. Key cards stopped working at the side doors after 6 in the evening. The first complaints hit the group chat before 9. Someone on the 5th floor posted a photo of a wall thermometer reading 92 degrees and asked if anyone else was dying. Replies poured in within seconds. By 10 o'clock, the indoor temperature had settled at a steady 96 degrees, with humidity thick enough to taste. People opened every window that wasn't sealed, but downtown Jacksonville in July offered no relief. Employees began leaving in waves. A few tried to tough it out with portable fans and cold water bottles, but once the freight elevator also went offline and the ice machine in the break room quit, most gave up. The creative team carried laptops to the parking garage and worked from their cars with the AC blasting. Others simply clocked out and texted their managers they would work remotely until further notice. Paxton's first call came at 11:17. I let it ring twice before answering on speaker so Nova and Jet could hear. He didn't bother with hello. He started shouting about lawsuits, breach of quiet enjoyment, criminal sabotage, anything that came to mind. When he finally paused for breath, I read him the exact paragraph from the lease he had never bothered to open. Upon any change of control, landlord may, at its sole discretion and without liability, terminate this lease on 30 days written notice and immediately suspend any service not required by applicable building code. I read it slowly, word for word, the same way Brady had read it to me the day before. He went quiet for a long moment, then tried a different angle. He offered to buy the building outright at whatever price I wanted if I reversed everything immediately. I told him the property was not for sale and that Summit Media still needed a signed lease extension to close their deal. Without one, their financing would collapse. He started yelling again, this time about family and blood, and how I would regret embarrassing him in front of the entire Jacksonville business community. I ended the call while he was still mid-sentence. Reginald tried next, leaving a calm voicemail asking for a reasonable discussion between professionals. I didn't call back. By 3 that afternoon, the building looked half empty from the street. Delivery drivers refused to carry packages past the lobby because the hand trucks wouldn't fit in the single working service elevator. The cleaning crew showed up, took one look at the heat, and left. Jet spent the day fielding texts from department heads who wanted to know whose side they were supposed to be on. Nova compiled a running list of every employee who had already updated their LinkedIn to open to opportunities. By nightfall, the 7-story building that used to hum with servers and music and late-night brainstorming sessions sat dark except for emergency lights and the red glow of exit signs. Paxton sent one final text just after midnight, a single line telling me I had won this round, but that he would see me ruined for it. I screenshotted it, forwarded it to the attorney handling the corporate governance claim I now planned to file, and went to sleep, knowing the next morning would be even hotter. Exactly 50 hours after I was thrown out, the emergency board meeting was held in the same building that now felt like a sauna. The conference room on the 7th floor was unbearable by 9 in the morning. The single emergency HVAC unit rattled uselessly while the thermometer on the wall read 94 degrees Celsius. Reginald kept wiping his forehead with a folded handkerchief, his tie loosened and shirt clinging to his chest. Paxton sat at the head of the table trying to look composed, but his hand shook slightly when he reached for his water glass. The other 3 board members fanned themselves with agendas printed hours earlier, when someone still believed the air might come back on. My attorney, Sarah Elizabeth Monroe, walked in carrying a black binder thicker than the building's lease. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She opened to the first tab and started reading from the shareholder agreement Paxton had pushed through 7 months ago. Every signature, every proxy, every consent form he claimed gave him control was laid out in chronological order. Then she flipped to a second section and presented email chains where Paxton instructed his personal counsel to draft documents that deliberately misrepresented the voting structure to dilute my shares without proper disclosure. She called it a clear violation of his fiduciary duty as a director and officer. The room got quieter the longer she spoke. One board member, a retired CFO who had joined 2 years earlier, started taking notes. Another asked for copies of the emails. Reginald tried to interrupt with a question about jurisdiction, but Sarah cut him off and moved to the next tab, a Delaware certificate of formation for Emerald Coast Holdings, listing me as the sole beneficial owner. I watched Paxton's face as she read my name out loud. His jaw tightened, and the glass in his hand stopped moving. He hadn't said a word since the meeting started. Sarah explained that as the landlord, I had legally terminated the lease, with 28 days remaining, leaving Nexus without a functional headquarters. Summit Media had already signaled they would walk away without a signed extension, and no bank would touch an acquisition with a tenant in default. The board members exchanged glances. The CFO stopped writing and leaned back, arms crossed. I stood up for the first time and spoke directly to the room. I told them I had built Nexus from a garage with no help from anyone sitting at that table, and that I would rather let the company dissolve than watch it gutted by people who thought loyalty was a transaction. Then I made my demand reinstate me as CEO, remove Paxton and Reginald from all positions, and withdraw every letter of intent with Summit Media immediately. If they refused, I would let the lease termination run its course and they could explain to shareholders why the company had no office. The vote took less than 5 minutes. 4 hands went up to restore my position and terminate Paxton and Reginald's roles. The 5th Reginald himself abstained. Paxton didn't get a vote. He stood up, walked out without looking at anyone, and left his water glass sweating on the table. 7 days later, the Jacksonville Business Journal ran a front-page story titled, "Family Feud Sinks Local Tech Darling." It detailed the boardroom coup, the lease termination, and Paxton's failed attempt to sell Nexus out from under me. LinkedIn posts from former employees and clients spread the story faster than any press release could. By the end of the month, Paxton's name was radioactive in Florida's marketing and tech circles. Firms in Orlando, Miami, and Tampa quietly removed him from their shortlists. His Wharton network stopped returning calls. I blocked Mom and Dad's numbers after their last joint voicemail asking me to fix this for the family's sake. They never apologized, never acknowledged what Paxton had done, and never asked if I was okay. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Jet and Nova became my anchors. Jet took a week off work to help me move back into the CEO's office now, on a different floor of a new building we leased across town. Nova rebuilt the team, rehiring everyone who had stayed loyal and replacing those who hadn't. Nexus lost a few clients, but the ones who stayed doubled their budgets out of respect for what we had survived. This story isn't just about winning. It's about what happens when you bet everything on yourself and the people who choose you back. Paxton thought money and a last name could erase me, but he forgot who laid the first brick. Blood doesn't make family, loyalty does. And never underestimate someone who started with nothing. To everyone who's listened this far, thank you for hearing me out. I hope this story reminds you that your work and your worth are yours to defend, no matter who tries to take them. Please share your thoughts below, whether it's about family betrayal or fighting for what's yours. I'd love to hear what this story means to you.